Impact!
Yeah.
That's the pose right there.
Hey, it's time to get down to brass facts. Today my review of the Vortex Strike Eagle first focal plane 1-8x with the EBR-8 Reticle. Whew. I'll be honest, when I first saw this optic, on paper, a lot of red flags were going off. The Strike Eagle, for those that don't know, one of the cheaper lines of LPVO optics that Vortex makes, with only the crossfires being cheaper. So it's Crossfire, Strike Eagle, PST, Razor, with the left side being cheaper and the Razor being the premium line. So when a Strike Eagle comes out that is more expensive than a PST, has a better feature set than a Razor Gen 2, and almost the same feature set as a Vortex Gen 3, that's the 1-10x, well, something had to give, right? However, a lot of people, some that I respect, some that I don't, are claiming that this optic is the best LPVO for under $1,000. Well, that's one hell of a claim. Not only because this is feature-packed, but because the reality is LPVOs are, by their very nature, an extreme series of compromises and a very difficult thing to execute upon. So the more you load onto an LPVO, the more you're probably going to have to skimp on the features, at least in theory. Regardless, let's see if the Stroke Beagle can live up to the hype, or if this optic is feature bait, and in reality only appeals to those that look at the side of the box, but then don't actually use the optic. Let's hit up the features. This is a 1-8x scope. That means we have 1 all the way up to 8x. That is a lot of scope. Because it's first focal plane, the location of the reticle means we can actually zoom the reticle in and out, versus a second focal plane where the reticle to you stays the same, but relative to the target shrinks. This is typically a more expensive product to produce because the reticle must be a much finer etching. Right? So seeing it here is somehow both amazing and also a little concerning due to the points I discussed earlier. Illumination is handled the same way we've seen done 100 times. Spin the dial on the left of the optic. However, there are no off positions in between, and hovering the off button in between doesn't really work out, as the detents are quite strong and it will eventually click over to one of the positions. There is no auto on off, so if you do that, you will probably leave it on by accident and you'll burn through the battery. The battery lasts typical LPVO amounts. This one, on setting 9, lasts just about 24 hours until the brightness falls off a roof and it's functionally unusable. This isn't at all abnormal for most LPVOs, especially the cheaper LPVOs, so just heads up. However, spoiler for the observations, the illumination is quite poor, so generally you'll just hang out at the 9 setting, and when you want it off, you'll dial up, and that gets you to the 0 setting. Illumination on the scope is absolutely really only for dusk and low light conditions. Zeroing is handled under the caps, and there seems to actually have been some effort in making these usable, both with clear legible notation, it being dialable, they're low profile, and you can reset such that the 0 mark is your 0. However, both the reticle design and that this is an LPVO makes this irrelevant in my eyes, and I set it and forget it. Sorry whoever put so much effort into those. Weight is coming in on the heavier side, coming in at 24 ounces with an arrow mount, which is basically the lightest mount you can get, or one of them. We are at 27 ounces, so we are investing a fair bit to get this on our rifle. Eye relief is stated at closing in on 4 inches, 3.9. To me, that seemed a bit high, and I'd argue this is in the mid 3s or maybe even the low 3 inches. However, once again, that's just really hard to measure in practice. Eye-box was noticeably generous. Forward and back, left and right was average, and you basically you don't really have much available there to you. Tube size is 30 millimeters. Objective lens is 24 millimeters. That's going to be on the smaller end of things for an 8X top end, and we're seeing a lot of manufacturers realize this, and we'll discuss more about that in a second. But this ends up giving us, with an 8X, an exit pupil of 3 millimeters, which is, in my opinion, right on the edge of bad, but not unusable. This scope comes with a throw lever, which is appreciated, as, in my opinion, these are basically mandatory to get the most out of your LPVO. Finally, the reticle. This is the EBR reticle. It comes with a lot of features. Starting off, we have a secondary ranging feature at the 12 o'clock, and all in all, this ends up being a slight iteration on the Razer Gen 3 reticle, except instead of a Christmas tree, this is a BDC'd, Christmas tree, for the lack of a better term. Iteration on the Gen 3 reticle. And probably an iteration on what we've seen out of primary arms. Granted, only so many ways you can skin a cat, but yeah. We have at 1X, we have the ever increasing in popularity, and rightfully so, T-post design, where you have lines that guide your eyes to the center. And because this is first focal plane, at 1X, you basically only see a small circle that ends up looking like a large dot. It does end up being a bit large, however, as you zoom in, that dot grows, and you see the rest of the reticle. You see the BDC and ranging features. Windage dots to assist with wind holds and do corrections out at distance. All the usual stuff, and actually quite good. More on that in a bit. Observations. I'm going to keep this to data as much as possible, basically only what I observed without explaining or my opinion of what I observed, except the reticle discussion, because reticles are inherently opinion-based. So I'll discuss the reticle, and then I'm just going to say what I've observed, and we'll keep the opinion for later, because I think the scope is in a weird place, and it's going to appeal to some, and it's going to suck for others, depending on what you value in a $600 scope. Reticle. I really like this reticle. I've sort of mentioned this with the Primary Arms 3X Prism, and I'll say it again here. BDCs with wind holds are my jam, and in my opinion are almost required at this point, because it just makes life so much easier. We know it exists, why not have it at this point? As for the first focal plane, I typically shy away from first focal plane scopes, especially on cheaper scopes, sub $1,000, because the industry frankly has a poor track record of executing on good first focal plane designs. I'm not saying all first focal plane designs under $1,000 suck, they just typically do. Here, yeah, we are walking that fine line for sure, but I think it absolutely pulls it off. The first focal plane reticle works both at 1X without illumination. The reticle doesn't get lost in the sauce, and the reticle you see at the higher magnifications, the 8X, the 5X in between, is actually still very much usable and not oversized, right, or undersized. That can't be said for a lot of other, quote, premium optics from competent manufacturers. The Tango 4 and the Tango 6 from SIG, the Razer HD Gen 3, right? A lot of these scopes just don't work on 1X without the illumination. The combination of the T-post and the usage of a small segmented circle that creates a singular aiming point allows for a very functional thing at 1X, and as you zoom in, the reticle walks that fine line, in my opinion, from not being too busy while still offering the correct amount of precision and bulk required to be a usable optics, both for precision style shooting and for run and gun style shootings. My only gripe is maybe the segmented circle does lose us a hair of precision at 1X, but in the grand scheme of things, in the big picture, I absolutely think it's worth it. So damn good job, I'll say. Until I get my hands on a Voodoo, I think this might actually be my favorite 1X, magnified optic combination thing that I've used so far and tested. Moving on to the scope itself. The glass quality. The glass quality is quite hard to describe, because the glass, or the image itself, looks decent throughout a large range of settings. However, it's everything else surrounding it that kind of gives me some issues. So let's start with the 1X. The image is great. Very clear colors, basically on par with newer scopes in this price bracket. However, when you actually analyze the image, you realize it's not flat, nor is it really 1X. There's noticeable distortion around the edges, so when you're moving around, it kind of looks like a fishbowl. This isn't nitpicking, right? Some scopes have non-1x images, but they're flat and close enough to 1x that I could consider that a 1x. This is moving drastically away from that, and indoors you will notice serious weirdness factor, yes, that's an official term, between your main eye and your off eye trying to collimate two images, because they are mismatched. When you move outdoors, that difference is so small that it's hard to notice past about 15 yards, and by 25 yards it's completely faded away. Alright, the 3 to 6x range. Let's get into the 3 to 6x range, right? The in-between ranges. And personally for me, the notion of you only use the 1x or you only use the max magnification is really only relevant for something like a 1 to 4x. For something like a 1 to 8x, I will very much often find myself using all the magnification range, especially in run and gun type scenarios. I like to use the 3 to 5x range and kind of spin between them if necessary. You'll see it in the video. Regardless, in this in-between range is where this optic probably shines. The image is, well, not the best, is perfectly acceptable for this price range. You'll see the usual color distortions around the edge, haziness, stuff beginning to look slightly out of focus or just blurry, not really out of focus. But it gets the job done, and you won't notice it unless you're hunting for it. However, going to 8x, things start to go to shit. The image quality begins to take a nosedive, stuff begins to look really hazy, colors begin to fade, and you begin to see false colors, color separation, the usual. Things just don't look crisp. This is true with most scopes at the top end, but this one's particularly bad, probably because of the choice of using a 8x top end versus a 6x top end. I was out with the boys shooting a 3-day thing where we just shot a lot for 3 days straight. Paired a lot of scopes present, $400 scopes, $300 scopes, $2,000 scopes. Regardless, this was pretty clearly on the low end of the performance scale. Basically, the scope's magnification was writing checks that the glass quality could not cash. In terms of usability, the eye box at the 8x, not the 1x as we were talking about earlier, is expectedly tight. Now, the choice to go to 8x instead of 10x, as they could have probably done here, probably saved us the brunt of the pain, but even on 8x, the 24mm tube results in that 3mm exit pupil, which is pretty bad on paper, but in practice it kind of depends. If you can get a stable shooting position where everything is locked in, yourself included, and I mean really locked in, it'll be pretty acceptable. However, as soon as your position begins to degrade, or it's more of an impromptu position, you'll find your head kind of sways around ever so slightly, and because your exit pupil is so small, you will be swaying in and out or close to in and out of the eye box area, and you'll be fighting the optic for that sight picture even before you take the shot. And due to the nature of how exits, pupil, or eye box work, as you move around, your already bad image quality will degrade and get better and degrade further. So you combine this eye box with the already middling to poor glass quality, and you begin to have an unpleasant 8x experience, for the lack of a better term. The simple way of putting it, there is a lot of friction between you and your equipment at the 8x here. Next up, the Parallax. I'm not really sure on the exact science here, and I actually didn't think this was a thing, but for whatever reason, the scope has pretty bad parallax compared to any other scope in this magnification range. That is, if you move your head within the small eye box, as I mentioned earlier, without actually exiting the image area, right? You have that crisp circular image, but you can still move around a little bit. Well, you'll begin to notice some zero shift or parallax. So much so that everyone that did shoot this over that 3-day thing we did, Cameraman 61, Hoplifile, and myself, we would get on target at maybe 400 or 300 yards, depending on the course, and get 1 or 2 hits right out of the gate, right? First round hits, and then we would just out of nowhere get a string of 5 misses that had nothing to do with wind. And then someone would yell, "Eye box, you nugget," probably more colorfully. They would reset and then generally be good. The eye box, or the parallax here, is not forgiving, and it seems exaggerated at the extreme ends of the scope's engagement window, 400 or so or plus. Now, all scopes have parallax issues, especially LPVOs, which have a huge range they have to contend with. But in my practice of shooting this, and even where I reset and tried to observe my eye box, I still wasn't always centered, and it was enough to cause misses. Shit, even when I was zeroing, I had noticeable shift as I began to lazily crunch my face into the stock and just observe my group massively shift at even 100 yards. It's a weird thing that I can't truly quantify, but at least you should know my experience in this regard. This was not an easy scope to shoot at the high end. Alright, let's get to my opinion, finally. If you want my gut feeling, right out of the gate, I didn't really jive with this scope. I wouldn't buy it. However, the more I sit on it, the more I shot it, the more I think I'll have to go for a softball answer. Sorry. It really depends. The 1X is bad indoors, and if you, like me, can't jive with the not great 1X, then yeah, look elsewhere. But like I said, when you get past 10 yards, it begins to become usable and the 1X becomes less of an issue, and you can work past it. The 8X is not pretty, for sure, but you can technically just dial the 6X and be in a much better place, or you can deal with the 8X, right? Because 8X is still 8X, the target is massive and it has a lot of utility. Kind of budget, right? $600 ain't bad. But we're also being kind of expensive, and we're edging closer towards that $800 mark, which opens up a couple scope options that, in my opinion, are superior to this. Like I mentioned, I really like this reticle design. I think it's one of the best, if not the best, sub $1,500 reticle design currently on the market, and specifically first focal plane, except the Voodoo, but like I said, I haven't touched that one, and I really want to. That being said, let me just give you my take. No, I won't shame anyone for buying this. It's a competent package, but for me, it left a lot to be desired. So it's a combination of the not great 1X, the poor image quality at 8X, coupled with the tight eye box at the max magnification range and the brutal parallax. It's not quite there for me. And while the price in reticle is extremely attractive, and the notion of you can just dial down to 6X kind of doesn't work with me, because we're paying for that 8X. Not just in literal cost, the dollar amount, but we're paying for it in weight and opportunity costs of having a different scope in its place. There are lighter scopes that cap out at 6X or even 4X that have the glass quality to back it up. And I've said this before, but it bears repeating in any LPVO or scope review where you talk about image clarity. Image clarity is about, or the image is about conveying data. We want to see things and understand things. Image quality, or lack thereof, is less data. A good 6X image conveys the same, if not more, than a bad 8X image, right? We're still looking at the same thing. So we're in the budget category. We paid money, weight, and all that, like I said, for that 8X. So that 8X better be able to perform. If not, I view the 8X as a sort of marketing gimmick in a lot of ways, right? That 8X wasn't free. We're at the $600 price point, so we're not even truly budget anymore, and we can begin to demand some features like clarity, good top end, and more. Because when you think about it, for $200 more, you can get a Razer HD Gen 2, not the E model, and that smokes this in clarity. And not only that, but it also brings an excellent 1X to the table, durability, excellent eye box, and more. Granted, the reticle does kind of feel dated at this point. As an aside, that actually makes me realize how dated the Razer HD Gen 2 is, and how awesome a new Razer for $1,300 with a first focal plane design and this exact reticle right here would potentially be. So yeah, in short, I'm not going to keep this guy. That being said, if you're still on the fence, I think this optic would work for a intermediate range rifle when you cap out roughly at the 350 to 400 yard mark, but you still want that magnification. However, if you intend to stretch the legs on this optic and you do want to be able to take that longer shot more consistently, well, I would say you should probably look elsewhere. Anyways, that's been some brass facts for you. I hope you enjoyed this video and my little tribulation with this little here scope. Thanks for watching and commenting. I do really enjoy this little community that honestly isn't so little anymore, and I'll see you guys around for the next one. Later.
Hey, look at everyone, it's a content dog. Focus, you fuck! There it is. Oh, I'm sorry. Hello, dog. He's doing stuff with the car. Nova, sit. There you go.
Oh, dude, that's like
Infinitely better.
infinitely better, and it looks better too.
Yeah. Hey, look, it's a flux.